this is where we have an opportunity to hear what it's like in the real world to organize a youth sports league and at the same time try to achieve player safety. Our moderator today is Patrick Escobar. Patrick is the Vice President for Grants and Programs here at the Foundation. 88? Yes. Started the same year I did. Oh my God, 1988.
We're ancient.
We're old.
We are.
And in the time that he's been here, he has overseen literally hundreds of grants throughout Southern California, and that has given him what I think is a unique and really unmatched depth and breadth of knowledge about youth sports in Southern California and the role it plays in our community. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Escobar, and he will introduce our other speakers.
Okay, good afternoon. I think as Wayne mentioned, the purpose of this particular panel is to kind of look at this issue of concussions from a different level, and that is from the ground up, if you would, from people who are involved each day in providing a sports opportunity for youngsters. And we're very pleased to have with us two gentlemen who have been doing this job for many, many years and have had a lot of experience, not only in their present positions, but really through their professional lifetime in dealing with youth, in some cases with the foster system, but whatever it may be, they have been dealing with not only the youth, but with the families. And so what I'd like to do first is have them introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their respective organizations, and then we'll go on from there. So let me start with Keith Johnson.
Hello, everyone. First of all, I'm pleased to be here. I'd like to thank LA84 for conducting this summit, and out of all the wonderful football programs that they work with and sponsor and provide funding for, that we were asked to sit on this panel. So we're honored to be here. My name is Keith Johnson. I'm the president of Southern California Falcons Youth Football and Cheer Organization. We started in 1985 with the advent of the Snoop Dogg Youth Football League in Los Angeles. We were one of 8 chapters that was selected to participate in that league. We started, however, with a very clear purpose, and that was to be a mission-driven organization. And the mission of the Falcons was never to win championship games, although that did come along, and it came along often. The mission of the Falcon organization was to utilize the social capital that came along with youth sports, particularly football, and that tremendous bond that occurs with a player and a coach for the benefit of that kid. So we have 3 primary components, or 3 primary missions that we're going to go after. Number 1, educational enrichment. How do you utilize that time to be able to enrich the lives of the kids through his education? Number 2, character development. We believe that one of the problems that we have in our community is that we simply have stopped teaching our kids values and character and morals. And who better able to speak into the lives of kids than the one that the kids idolize more than anyone else. So we have a program called Teaching New School Kids Old School Values, where we looked at the values of us who are part of our community and began to teach that. And number 3, health and wellness. We simply have too many kids and parents that are not taking a real serious look at the wellness of our kids. 31% of the kids in Los Angeles age 16 and under are considered obese. And we have to begin to utilize, again, the social capital to go along with that to address those issues. So, again, football for us gives us meeting time, meeting place, meeting location, coaches who can become mentors and not just simply coaches, to invest into the lives of our kids. And our challenge is not necessarily having kids to play football. Our challenge is having men who are not kids teach our kids how to play football.
Mr. Lomax.
First of all, I just want to make sure everybody understands I have not been doing this as long as Keith has. But I'm currently serving as the director for San Diego Youth Football, which is one of the larger youth football organizations in the country. And like Keith, we have really made a social change to develop our kids at a level other than what football provides, to ensure that we provide them the best mentors and the best people in our organizations to develop young men and young women that are contributors to their community and society. We've we've made huge strides in the efforts of training them along those lines. With about 5,000 participants in San Diego youth football, we've had a great deal of success over the 40 years that the organization has been around. 4 Heisman Trophy winners are products of that organization, and also a lot of championships along the way as well. My own personal background, a 22-year veteran of the United States Navy, and then a 15-year veteran of coaching and youth sports, currently a special ed teacher at a high school and a high school coach, as well as being the director for this organization. I just want to, I would be remiss if I didn't thank LA84 for inviting me to even be here. I feel privileged to be able to contribute something. Thank you to Gabby Tovar for inviting me, and Mr. Wilson. Just happy to be here and hopefully shed some light on the challenges that we have at the youth level.
So let's talk about those challenges, because from the youth football perspective, it isn't only about the getting a youngster to play, but it's dealing with the parents and the coaches. So kind of the first question that I have for you is, how have you adopted to the latest, and the data has been out there, and we recognize that the concussion issue has been out there, but how have you respectively adopted to the recent notoriety that now concussions have in terms of youth football? Both in terms of how, have you changed anything that you're now doing, or have in terms of education of coaches, so any of those aspects?
You go first. Probably the biggest change that we've made is come about because of our partnership with USA Football. We've mandated as a conference that each of my 24 associations are members of USA Football. All of our coaches have to be certified through their process. We also, what Bobby's doing with the Train 'em Up Academy, we do a lot of our coaches participate in that. We've mandated the CDC course in addition to the USA Football course for all of them. And one of the things we're looking at developing moving into next year is we have a mandatory 20-hour before they can begin tackling or hitting process that includes 10 hours of conditioning and 10 hours in their pads. What we're looking to do is for next year to take kind of more of a positive control of that 20-hour period and develop a program that includes some neck strengthening and hydration and conditioning, a format that can help prepare our players better for contact. That's a mandated system that everybody's going to use, that we've developed through athletic trainers and people in that industry. So that's one of the things we're looking to do. And education's I think, the ignorance part, being able to remove that from the parents and from the coaches, educating them as best we can. The USA does a great job of developing systems for that and getting the information out with our trainers and our coaches. So education is probably paramount, the biggest thing we're doing.
Keith?
We also participate. I've personally been involved with Bobby Hosea for about 15 years now. I remember taking my second oldest son to Narbonne High School, where Bobby Hosea had one little sled, and I think he only had one hat at that time. I was teaching our kids the concept of heads up tackling, getting your heads out of the tackle. At that time, I think it was dip and rip. And so we've been consciously aware of that, although it wasn't like as pronounced as it was now. We have two challenges. The first challenge we have, to be honest, for our parents in the inner city is even to make them aware of it. I think many of our parents are simply ignorant of the fact that the concussion issue is as prevalent as it is, and even more so, the cumulative trauma, that's something that they don't even know about. So we have to educate them on that. The other thing is we have parents who think that their son is Superman. That is simply not going to happen to my child. The other thing we have to make them aware of is not only is it possible, but your son don't have to be the running back or the quarterback to receive a concussion, that he's playing offensive line or defensive line. There's some banging that's going on in the trenches. And so we have to educate them on that. And this whole conference, I sent the email out to many of our coaches, many of our fellow presidents. And many of the presidents hit me back as like, man, I'm not telling our parents that. They'll go to that conference and not want the kids to play football. Well, I took a different approach. I email blast every single one of my parents. I clearly stated that if I had a son playing football, he would come to this conference. We went on social media and put it on social media and said, listen, what is going on? Learn about this. So some of our parents, the African American community is funny. We don't want to go get physicals because we think the doctor's going to tell us something's wrong with us. And so it's important, first of all, with the parents, is simply to make them aware that you need to know what's going on. The second thing is to be honest, and again, I may lose some coaches, but that doesn't matter. We have to get some of the old dinosaur coaches out of football. We absolutely have to get them out of football. You know, someone said it earlier, coaches simply don't want to, they're old dogs that don't want to learn new tricks. And so we'll go to the Bobby Hosea, and they'll just sit around in the background, and they'll flip their fingers, and, you know, they'll chat it up, or they get a text or whatever, and then they don't do anything. I'm a preacher. I know what it feels like to preach a revival, and everybody amen, but then nobody goes home and do anything about what you just amened about. And it's the same thing with coaches. And so in our 8 years of being a youth football program, we're babies. We went through 5 coaching staffs because you just don't get it. We had a coach last year that won the championship. You got to go. You don't get it. And organizations have to take the time and be bold enough to say, if you do not understand what our mission is, what our purpose is, and what we're trying to do, then you have to go. And so we have to basically begin to bring in coaches that understand that. And then the third thing that we do with our parents is we make them aware, once again, of what's available to them and give them that option. It really is about education. And then last thing I'll say quickly, and again, I might irritate somebody else, but there's a lot of confusing information out there about what kids should do and should not do. And I love USA football, and I had the privilege of being invited to go back to Canton, Ohio a couple of years. But I'll be clear, there's some stuff on USA football that's garbage to me. We talk about keeping your head out of the tackle, but then there's some things on USA football where this video where the kid is actually having his head going across the body. That's putting their head back in the tackle. So what are we doing? I go to Bobby Hosea and get your head out. Then I go to USA football that I'm mandated to put all my coaches through, and then there's another mixed message there. And so we also have to have a singular message. What is the process? What we're going to do, how we're going to do it, and make sure that everybody's on the same page, and on the same page for the benefit of the kids, not on the same page for the benefit of somebody's personal agenda.
And Keith makes a great point there. I mean, make no mistake, there are entities out there that have a stake in teaching kids the right way to tackle. I mean, I get emails weekly from different organizations, even directly affiliated with the NFL Players Association, that want to market a product, and they want you to buy something to teach kids a way to tackle, and it does send a mixed message, and it makes it difficult when you're trying to make a shift in a culture in an organization, especially the size of ours or PCC conference or some of the Pop Warner organizations, and get everyone to buy in. But make no mistake that the change has to happen, and people have to buy into it. And what Keith does and mandating that with the coaches is important. But getting a clear message, would make it a lot easier.
Dr. Cantu made the point earlier that mandating and having coaches attend the clinics, and we run a lot of coaching clinics, probably isn't sufficient until you somehow begin to at least test or do some sort of exam to make sure that people were paying attention. Do you think you'll ever get there in terms of youth football?
Yes, but we're only going to get there if presidents of organizations also come be a part of the same page. See, the challenge that I have with the Falcons is we'll tell a coach you can't do that, you can't teach that, and he'll leave us and go to a competing organization and do the same thing. Even though that president of the competing organization knows that he's teaching inappropriate or maybe not doing the things he should do, but because that coach wins, then we'll accept him. So the real challenge is not really the coaches. The real challenge is an organization that bring the coaches in, that we get on the same page and say, this is the standard of excellence that we want. These are the policies and the procedures that we're going to follow. And you just can't run from one place to another place. It's going to take that. And once again, it's going to take educating the parents, empowering them to demand that their coaches teach their kids the right way. They demand that they play running back or football or cornerback or anything else. Parents need to become more involved and more proactive and saying, hey, that's wrong. Let's do this the right way. But it's going to take a collective effort for that to happen.
Again, for us, it's just really about the culture shift. I think that we have to mandate it. It has to become something that's mandatory, and not just the education part, but also a way to evaluate their progress in that. And ultimately, for our associations, in the wake of Junior Seau's death, we saw about a 12 to 15% decrease in the number of participants in our organizations. But for the associations that have bought into the education of their parents, for the coaches that have adopted our policies and procedures for no return to play and using the tackling systems that we're teaching, their numbers have come back and they've gone, increase in numbers. While the others that continue to try to fight the system, they're still lagging behind. So I think if as coaches buy in and we get rid of some of the coaches that aren't willing to make the change, then ultimately the system becomes better.
At what age do you begin tackle football in San Diego first, and then Keith?
We start we have 7-year-olds at tackle all the way to 14.
Okay, Keith.
We have a 6-year-old instructional where the games are not competitive from the aspect that they keep score, all the way to 13.
So would you consider moving that age up at some point and starting with flag football, or number one, and number two, what are the pressures that keep you, perhaps, if you want to do that, from doing that?
Well, for us, we start with a flag football at 5, and then we have an instructional level that starts at 7 for our tackle players, and then they move on to, we have a grade-based, no weight limit system for our 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And ultimately, I'm a fan of having tackle football at that age, because the injuries, the concussions that we're seeing, at least in our conference, are happening with our 7th and 8th graders. And then really, to me, the bigger problem is the high school. Those are the coaches that are, at least the ones that I'm around, they're the ones that are fighting the change. They're the ones that aren't being mandated or regulated to make change. So I see a much bigger problem with my kids as they become more physically mature, being susceptible to concussion than my 7th and 8th, 7 and 8-year-olds.
Pop Warner actually allows young people to start playing tackle football at the age of 5, which is just ridiculous to me. 6 years of age is where we start tackle football. My goal is to move that to 7. For us, however, it is not necessarily the age that's the reason why we open up the doors. We open up the doors because we want to begin to invest in the lives of our kids as early as possible. Our program has some unique things attached to it. We have several coaches that work at night and they're available during the day. And we have a kid who has a problem at school. The coaches actually go to the schools and monitor their kids' behavior in school. We have a weekly school form that our kids take to school every single week, and if he's not doing the thing that he needs to do, he can't practice. We have a 20-foot mobile homework trailer that goes every practice. That's staffed by parents who are educators, and they have to get their education in. We can't wait till they're 14 to begin to do that. We have to begin to create within them lives some healthy habits now, and if I can get them at 6 and 7 years of age, begin to develop with them at that time, then when they do go to high school, they're already prepared. We have a program called Books Before Balls, academics before athletics. And so we understand the risk factors that come along with that, but whereas maybe 4% of our kids may concuss, 60% of our kids do not graduate from high school. I have to address that early. Whereas 4% may concuss, 75% of kids in high school in South LA do not read at grade level. So, okay, do I sacrifice 70% of my kids at the risk of 40%, at the risk of 4% or 5%? There's some risk factors that we're taking, and I'm not diminishing the thought or looking over the thought. We're doing everything that we can to reduce that. I'm sorry if I'm going on. We adhere to LA County Pop Warner rule about 40% engagement. We wrote a grant this year. Unfortunately, we were funded by LA 84 to get more safe tackling equipment out there to reduce the kids hitting one another. But at the same time, as it relates to the social challenges that we have, we need to get our kids in the system that's going to produce men and women at the known risk of possibly having injuries, but doing everything we can to reduce those injuries because we know what they are.
Dr. Cantu?
Yeah, I am so impressed with Keith and Phillip and what they're saying and the mentoring that's going on. It is just very, very impressive. If you'd ask, as I have, John Warner of Pop Warner Football, or you ask Hallenbach of USA Today why they're not pushing the flag football, the answer they'll tell you is because the parents don't want their kids playing flag football. The parents want the kids playing tackle, and on and on. The question I have for you, Keith, is knowing what I just said, do you feel that you couldn't attract the kids at the early ages to flag football and mentor them just like you're mentoring in tackle? Because the mentoring part has nothing to do with whether there's tackle or not in the game, unless the kids wouldn't show up to avail themselves of this mentoring, which is so important.
They won't show up. We've tried to do a flag program before. The numbers are not there. We have parents who have come over to our program who've left flag program because their 6-year-old, 7-year-old wants to play tackle. And so, A, they won't show up, and B, they do not have the same level of buy-in as a flag versus a tackle.
Well, I gotta keep educating those parents.
I agree.
One of the, we'll have questions in a few minutes. It's okay. One of the other issues that was brought up earlier is the role of the referees, and we always talk about the volunteer coaches. Can you tell us a little bit about the training that you referees receive and whether they're certified, and how do you monitor that so they are in fact enforcing the safety rules that you guys have set out?
Keith could take that one first.
Oh, you want me to take it? I was deferring to you. I don't know how to answer that question because, to be honest, we have very little. We don't have any contact with referees. Youth referees have a godlike complex. No, that's the truth. That's the truth. There are certain rules that tiny mites play by in order to keep them safe, which is the younger age group. There are certain rules that mighty mites play by, which is designed to keep them safe, which is the youngest age group. And referees don't even know the rules. And when you try to bring that to their attention, they just like, with, I'm calling the game the way I want. You don't have to play. For example, in tiny mite, younger age group, you can't blitz. You can't blitz. You can't stack the house. You got to be able to allow the guy to get the ball off. And they don't know the rules. You got blitzing going on, kids getting hit on the blind side. You try to tell the referee, we have a problem here. Well, this is how I ref. He's pulling out a CIF book on how he refs. So I don't know. Something has to be done as it relates to that. I asked to be on the referee panel in LA County Pop Warner, and they specifically said no.
But whose responsibility is it to hire the coaches? So, Mr. Lomax.
Well, I mean,
the referees.
Keith makes the great point. I mean, your officials, they ultimately, most everything that happened is down to their interpretation, right? So it's just like with Mighty Mite, we have the same issues with blitzing and players attacking the ball, and coaches skirt that line, right? I mean, you're training your guys to walk up or be in position so that makes it difficult for the officials to make a call on something like that. But it does affect the safety, and we do pay them, but we have no real alternatives. I mean, There's no competing organizations for us to go to find other officials. And what I will say is that my counterpart in Phoenix, D. Greer, what he's done is now he's gone out and formed his own officials organization, and they have to be trained according to what guidelines Phoenix AYF has set, and they have to meet that criteria or they can't get those games. And if you know, I think an approach like that is probably the only way that you can take in order to assure the officials are going to meet your guidelines as far as the safety of the players and how to officiate games. And plus, I mean, and officiating is absolutely our largest expense as an organization. And you would expect that there's some kind of guidelines, but other than what CIF sets forth for them, you know, we're kind of at the mercy of the organization.
That's scary. Yeah. Is that, I know there are a lot of coaches out there, is that pretty much what you find?
Can I say something about it?
Sure.
I'm coaching high school now. This is my second year as well as Pop Warner because of my schedule. And the problem is, it don't matter if it's Pop Warner, Judo America, whatever we are, is that we depend on the local high school units to officiate our games. There is no other governing body, like you said, Phil, and I can speak to that, and we have our sole dependence on those. Like, for instance, we have the LA unit, Long Beach unit, Valley unit. So we hire those units to officiate Pop Warner. Now, Keith's more on the board of Pop Warner. We could probably answer, you know, questions in depth about that, but that's what we depend on.
Okay. Yes.
There actually needs to be a national referee system where they're trained nationally on level. Like Pop Warner has their guidelines. I'm in Junior All-American. We're more locally. Our chapters are locally. We don't have an oversight. But what's happening is if they don't change, the referees don't call it equally all across the board, you're going to have those same injuries. You're going to have the same type of concussions because they're not changing their mind and their thinking. You get a different referee every week. We actually, in the Inland Empire, we actually grade our referees, but it still hasn't gotten to the point where we need to have it consistent across the board, where the tackling has to be the same, head down rules have to be the same. I think if they start calling the head being down, and that you see the contact head to head, call unsportsmanlike penalty. I don't know what needs to be the penalty, but they have to get to that level. So if they don't, it'll be different in Los Angeles, and it'll be different in the Inland Empire, but we'll have the same injuries or we'll have the same situation nationwide.
Yes, sir.
But you have the same problem. That's the major issue I think in youth sports. If you're in a different conference like Pacific Coast Conference or Pop Warner, their weights are different. First of all, I mean it's different all across the board. And this is one of the comments I was making earlier today. I was talking to Anita in regards to how everybody's conference specific. If Junior All-American has rules or they have an event, I'm not going to go if I don't belong on it, because guess what? It's not mandatory for me. And a lot of coaches, as far as they're concerned, they don't really want to go. Bobby, my God, you know, when I first went to the thing, I was like, Jesus Christ, where have you been all this time? I tell every coach that I can talk to, whether they're in our conference or not, you got to go to this camp. How many, do you see them there? No, they don't show up. You can tell Bobby, I mean, he does such a great job and stuff. But the problem is that you have so much differences there, right? So now there's competition. And exactly what Keith says is correctly true. You can set standards. That's exactly why when he said, can you give an exam? No, because guess what? You're going to give me an exam at Pop Warner? I'm going to Junior All-American. And guess what? There's no test there. And guess what? Then they're going to sell it to you and say, hey, you know what? We're not going to test you, so come on over. It's easier over here. Guess what? Now, any advantage that I can use against you as a conference, I'm going to use it. And the sad thing about it is, guess what? The standards of that guy that has no morals, guess what? I'll pay for your back flap. You come play for me. Guess what? You know what? They want to charge you how much? Guess what? I'll pay for you. Oh, you know what? What, an exam? Are you kidding? Are they stupid? Come over to us. Our conference is really better. You don't have to do that. A tackling, mandatory tackling, and pay $40, $50 to go to that yourself? Hell no. Our conference doesn't do that. Come on over.
All right.
CPR? No. I'm just giving CPR certification. No, we don't do
Yeah,
that.
we understand
Back
that.
check?
Yeah.
Oh, we don't do that.
And it's unfortunate because that's not what youth
I can
sports is
get
supposed to
on
be
everyone,
about.
and that's the problem
No.
that I see and stuff. And Keith is right on the button.
So winning is still kind of number one.
Well, I think, for us in San Diego, we mandated it. I haven't lost a single quality coach that I can think of. There's not a guy that I want in that organization that has not
great.
completely met the requirements for
How many
USA.
competing cities- How many competing organizations do you have?
We still have Pop Warner there.
Okay, out here, there's Pop Warner, Junior All-American, there's AAU, there's Valley Conference. You have like 6 or 7 when you're competing. So guess what? When there's a variety, I can play off. It's just like those bad teachers, right? Kick me out of LA Unified School District.
All right, we won't go there.
You know?
There was another question back here. Yes, sir.
Yes, one of the things that nobody's touched on specifically is economics.
Yes.
San Diego County may have a little more access. In LA County, you have Chapels, Beverly Hills, Bellflower, and everything in between. Keith being in the inner city versus some of the other areas, the economic factor of bringing in the appropriate equipment. I've been a president, I've been a high school football coach. LA City high school football versus CIF, modern days of the world, you're gonna always have the volunteer problem where they can't pay 5 coaches, but this staff can have 40 coaches. So when we start dealing with the real factors of economics, you're gonna always have this issue. The second part is volunteer. You're asking coaches to, hey, give 2 hours a day to teach football. Go to all these clinics, spend all their time on money, gas, travel, and all these certifications. And some of them, like you just said, I don't wanna do all that. I'll go right next door and then not do anything. So you're fighting 2 ends to me. Economics and volunteer, free and money. How do we deal with that? Because LA84 can't sponsor everybody.
And we know that.
I wish they could.
I'll say,
Keith, go ahead.
no good. Well, I'll say this. So last year, we had about 1,024 coaches in San Diego youth football, and there are some areas that have very good socioeconomic status, and we have some very low-income, at-risk communities as well. I've mandated the USA football course for every coach, and they've all paid for it and their own background checks. I'm maybe 20 coaches less than I was last year, so still over 1,000 coaches. I think that the community, and San Diego maybe is a little different because of the impact of the junior say-out loss. I think people have really bought into the idea that we've got to make the game safer. But as a conference, by mandating it, I was certainly concerned that we would lose coaches and lose kids. But it's been the opposite. The community's embraced it. They've accepted their responsibility. Our coaches have. And the ones that haven't have been replaced by ones that are, apparently, because our numbers seem to reflect that. So regardless of the socioeconomic status and what some of our communities have, I think that the overall concern for the state of the game and the safety of the kids long-term has just completely overshadowed that.
Keith, go ahead.
I think a couple of things can be done, and Lamont is right, and Lamont is humble with his description of who he is. Lamont was the president of Carson Colts Football, which is probably one of the larger organizations in the city of Los Angeles that has a history of not only winning but building out character-driven young men, despite who their president was. But that's a jab at Lamont.
Is he wearing a Modern Day shirt?
Yeah. There's 2 things that can happen economically. First of all, youth football organizations, as well as everybody else, has to learn how to think outside the box. I'm actually insulted when people call me a youth football organization, because we're not. We're a community-based organization. We're actually Falcon Youth and Family Services. We're a community-based organization that has some defined objectives. And we need to begin to teach youth football organizations to understand who they are and help them redesign who they are and market themselves different than what they are. There are many community-based organizations in the city that write a ton of grants and do piss-poor work with the money that they got. And they were supposed to do education, and they don't. They're supposed to do character development, and they don't. They're supposed to do health and wellness, and they don't. But they have great people on staff that write great grants and get a ton of money. Well, the truth of the matter is we have Joe, who works a 9-to-5 job, and his wife, Sally, who does more effective work than some of the major community-based organizations in the city. But because they haven't placed themselves in a position to be a nonprofit, because they haven't placed themselves in a position to build an effective board, because they haven't placed themselves in position to acquire data. They don't get the resources that they should necessarily get to do the service that they have done. They have 40 to 50 coaches, as Lomax said, volunteer a ton of time, but they don't get the necessary resources. And so what we set out to do through trial and error is build a youth football organization that had defined outcomes and were able to compete against those guys. It took us 7 to 8 years, but we're there now, or we're getting there, to where we can go after those fundings that will allow us to service our babies that's already within our community and help those organizations do better. And the last thing I'll say is this young man is right. At the end of the day, if we really want to redesign youth football, we need to start another league. I know the last thing we want is another league, but that's the exact thing we need. We need a league where we can monitor that every single coach in that organization participates in Bobby Josea's program. We need a league where we can demand that every single organization within that league actually reduces hitting. We need a league that absolutely demand that we are going to take out some of the higher risk part of the game. No kickoffs, no punts, no punt returns. The Falcons can do whatever they want to do in-house, but nothing is going to change, and my coach is going to rebel against that change if it's not an equal playing field. So if LA 84 and USA Football and Dr. Cantu and everybody else really want to make this thing work, then let's come together. Let's identify those more enlightened organizations. Let's build a league where we can say 5 years from now and 3 years from now, we have empirical data that says by playing football this way and this type of organization will reduce injuries, and this is what we need to do. That's where we need to go. Otherwise, the only thing we're going to do is keep planting seeds, and as the Bible says, some are going to fall on good grounds, but most is going to fall on grounds that's no good, and we're going to completely keep going through this process over and over again.
Okay. Joe, go ahead.
Keith, I hear what you're saying, and I know about your program, it's outstanding, but I hear that economically is an issue, but I also think politically that you get the unified school districts, you get the cities, you get the counties, and you adopt it ordinance-wise or whatever, and you control the field allocation, and people are gonna have to buy it. And I think that's another level that you have to take it.
Well, I mean, you know, what Keith has done, and I met Keith 2 years ago, and he absolutely inspired us to kind of change the way that we brand our organization, because it is bigger than football. I have coaches out there that are mentors, that are impacting the lives of young men and young women. I have a cheer director that's got a 98% success rate from at-risk homes and communities for girls that she's sent off to college. So it's not football, and that really keeps us from getting the money, is being a football organization, right? The money's out there, but we have to be a education and mentoring system. And for the city of San Diego, for example, I can't get support because there's NYS and there's Pop Warner, and they won't do for one what they won't do for all. So without there being one organization, without there being one umbrella, we'll always be handcuffed as far as getting support from city or county organizations, regardless of how we market it. So.
But let me say this real quick. It goes back to what you said. It's how you brand yourself. Rydell gave us $40,000 worth of equipment, but they didn't give it to the Falcon Youth Football Organization. They gave it to Falcon. They gave it to Falcon Community-Based Organization. Okay. We have a lot of sponsors that will not give money to sports organizations. They give money to the community-based organization. And the football is one of the tools that we use. Now, it's not line item money. In other words, if it was line item money, it would simply say this money has to be used for that, okay? But they know full well who they're supporting and what we're going to use it for, but by the sake of their own limitations according to who they fund, they can say, we gave $40,000 worth of equipment to a youth and family service organization that in turn is going to benefit the kids in that community. You guys, I would love to work with other organizations to come in and say, this is how we do it. We'll give this stuff away for free. I'm only going to service 200 kids. I don't want to have 25 football teams. 200 kids is about as many kids as I can deal with without losing my mind. But we would love to partner with whomever to say, this is how we did it. we also know there's other better ways to do it, and have another conference where we teach people how to rebrand themselves so that they can receive all the services that they need. I don't want to be the only light shining on the hill. We want to teach everybody else how to do the same thing.
Just getting back to the concussion issue for a second, one of the points that has been made repeatedly is that incidence of reporting has increased because I think more parents and certainly kids perhaps recognize that they might have suffered a concussion. But in youth sports, and particularly at your level, who is responsible for identifying and taking a kid out of the game? As we know, it's probably the coach, but what's the kind of the follow-up on that, which we heard before, issues of getting that kid back and playing, all of that? Can you talk a little bit about
Sure. So, I mean, for us, it really comes down to anyone. If you have an athletic trainer there that identifies it, they can remove them. If a coach identifies a symptom, and we use the CDC guidelines as far as symptom recognition, and an official can remove them. And CIF has kind of mandated a no return to play, or the state has mandated a no return to play. So a symptom for us, any symptom identified is a disqualifier for that day, and then it requires doctors' release to return to practice, and then we follow the CDC guidelines for return to play as a guideline once they've come back to us. So if a doctor says it's 2 weeks, then when they come back after those 2 weeks, then they're still going to follow that 6-day procedure before they can see the field again as far as live contact. So
how many of your teams have athletic trainers that are actually in the game?
you know, this will be the first year that we've even been able to financially make it available. We found a pool of trainers that'd be willing to work for us for $30 a game. We've been able to kind of achieve that level, but it's still, some of our organizations can't afford to have those trainers there even at $30 a game, and some will. So probably maybe 8 to 10 of the 24 can actually afford to do that. So.
For us, really briefly, in LA County Pop Warner, at the game site, there's a medic at every game. There's a licensed, professionally trained medic at every single game, and he makes the final call whether the kid goes back in, whether the kid sits out, and then there's some follow-up instructions to that. At practice, where most of the injuries occur, we have Melvin, who is our person that actually looks at all the kids that are injured, make sure that they're okay, have a conversation with the coaches, recommend that the kid go out and receive medical attention, and then before the kid is allowed to come back and play, Melvin, our athletic director, checks off and makes sure that all the steps and guidelines was followed. So again, we have the safety procedure at the field and at practice.
I need 24 Melvins.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, we're out of time, so thank you very much for your comments.
Well, that brings us almost to the end. I would first of all like to thank all of the speakers today for their remarkable insights and expertise. And second, I would like to thank you, the audience, for the questions and the comments that you made from the floor. Go ahead. So, I just want to close by highlighting what to me were some of the more important points that were made during the day. And I think that the first thing that really struck me is that the science surrounding this topic is imprecise, it's young, it's underdeveloped. A number of the speakers pointed out the paucity of information that exists right now. And I may be wrong in saying this, but I get the impression there's not even a universally agreed upon definition of concussion. So we're still at an early stage in really getting to the science of this. The second point is that there seems to be, this question of tackle football isn't necessarily a black and white one. It's not a question of are we going to play tackle or aren't we going to play tackle, but it's how we are going to play tackle. You can do it in a way where kids are hitting full contact, helmet to helmet, 5 times a week, or you can do it in a way where they never hit helmet to helmet and they have contact once a week. So there are all kinds of ways to adjust the game, adjust practices to minimize risk. Nevertheless, there still is risk involved in playing football, and I don't think anybody is pretending that there isn't. And we know that however imprecise the science may be, getting hit or experiencing head trauma is bad. Having it happen repeatedly over a long period of time is worse. And having it happen repeatedly over a long period of time and have it unrecognized and untreated is the worst scenario of all. So there is a risk in playing football. Keith would argue, I'm sure Phillip would argue, that there's a risk in not playing football just as well. And so for all of us in the room, the real issue is how can we create programs that will attract kids, keep them involved, and at the same time minimize the risk to their immediate and long-term health. And then the final point that I want to make, and this really came out strongly in this session, which by the way was a great session, thank you. The final point is that reform in youth sports is really hard. It's really hard. Somebody once said that the essence of sport is not movement, it's memory. And we heard people say over and over again, the problem here is that you got these coaches who remember how they did it 30 or 40 years ago, and they want to keep doing it that way, right? So anytime you take away something from youth sport that is traditional, you're going to have other people coming along and offering it up in your place. So if you take away this, somebody else is going to come along and offer it. Case in point is USA Hockey. USA Hockey right now is involved in a very interesting, I guess you would call it, experiment to implement something called the American Development Model. It is a model that is designed or intended to develop the best possible elite hockey players. They're not doing this because they're all touchy-feely and they're worried about little kids, although I think they are worried about little kids. But their real reason for doing this is they want to develop the best hockey players they can. And so they sat down and they said, what are the skills that make the best elite hockey players? And they said, first of all, it's skating. Second, it's stick handling and passing. Third, it's the ability to read the game. And fourth is checking. It's the ability to hit somebody and be hit and keep on playing. And that was the order of importance. So, hitting was the last thing that they felt was important. And so they've changed the game in some important ways. For example, they no longer, with the little kids, with the peewees, the 8-year-olds, 7-year-olds, they no longer play length of the ice. They play cross ice, right? Because it forces them to do more skating, it forces them to do more technical skating, and to get a lot more touches on the puck. Right? They have also gotten rid of national championships for 8-year-olds because, for a lot of reasons, they think that inhibits raw talent identification and development. And another thing they have done is they have eliminated body checking for kids 12 and under. So a couple of months ago, I heard a couple of guys from USA Hockey talk about this American Development Model. And what to me was interesting about it was they spent, maybe a third of the presentation talking about the specifics of the model and why they've done what they've done. They spent the rest of the time talking about the politics and the problems of implementing it. Because the first thing that happened when they said no checking, no national championships, no length of the ice games, is that AAU came along and said, you want little kids to body check? Sure. You want them to play the length of the ice? Sure. You want them to be able to spend, $500 a head and go to Florida and have a national championship? Well, yeah, we'll offer that. And one of the people involved with AAU hockey was quoted publicly as saying, people are going to leave USA Hockey in droves. And USA Hockey was worried that maybe that would happen, but they said, we think this is the right way to do it. We're going to stick with it, and we are going to do it. As it turns out, those chapters of USA Hockey that have started to implement this plan haven't seen a drop-off. Their numbers are very high, and their retention rates are great. So how this will ultimately play out, I don't know. So I don't tell you this story because I think football should necessarily do everything that hockey is doing, but the point I want to make is that if you sat here today and you've decided that you want to somehow do something differently with your league, be prepared to get some pushback, be prepared to get some opposition, because not everybody's gonna like what you wanna do. And if you wanna make it stick, you better be very committed to it, okay? Thank you very much.